You're watching Managing vCenter with Power CLI. This is a part of the VMware vSphere Power CLI training video course. In this lesson, we're going to start off with an overview of the vCenter commandlets. These are commandlets that you could use for managing the manager, managing the resources that you have available to you in vCenter. Then we're going to talk about working with containers, custom attributes, and how to manage access control in vCenter. First, let's talk about the range of commandlets that we're going to be talking about in this lesson. And there's over 20 of them in the category that the way that I've organized these. Some of the nouns that we're going to be talking about, the commandlets, the PowerShell commandlets, we have annotation, custom attribute, data center, folder, VI permission, and there's several others that we'll be covering. First up is containers. As a management tool, vCenter excels at allowing you to abstract your virtual inventory and place it within containers. This helps you with organization. It helps you with assigning permissions and all the different ways that you can manage your virtual machines. You can group them together. You can make them logical. You can make them fit to your organization. So let me bring up my vSphere client and show you a couple of things. So when I talk about containers, there are a few different types. We have in the hosts and clusters view, the top containers, well, the very top container is going to be your virtual center instance. And if you're using linked virtual centers, you can have multiple of those in the same view. But below that, you have data center. And below data centers, you have either clusters or host servers. But you can optionally also have folders as well. As you can see that I've got a folder right here. So the containers that I'm talking about in this video, we talked about clusters and resource pools and the relationships of hosts to VMs and so forth in previous lessons. The containers that I'm going to be talking about in this lesson are primarily the data centers and folders. Note that you've got two different types of folders. We have yellow folders. These are the folders that you see in the hosts and clusters view. And then if you go to the VMs and templates view, you've got blue folders. Same end result, it's just a container, but blue folders can only contain virtual machines and templates. The yellow folders can contain, as you can see over here, clusters or host servers. So we've got the same general feel to them. There's not a whole lot that you can do to them. There's no settings. The only two attributes that they have are their name and their location. And I'll show you how to customize those using Power CLI momentarily. For example, we have a new folder commandlet, which I will be showing to you shortly. As I mentioned, we have both data centers and folders, and each of these have their own commandlets. In fact, they each have a sort of an identical set of commandlets. I'm going to page through these really quickly. We have get, new, move, set, and remove for data centers. And then for folders, we have the same set. And you've been viewing some of these lessons by now. You probably understand the verbs well enough that I don't have to go through them in any great level of detail. So it's the same thing that you've seen before. And I'll show you how these work in a demonstration right now. Okay, let's begin looking at the data center commandlets. So I'll start off very simply with get data center. And you can see that I've got 3 in this particular instance. Don't forget PowerShell, it's all about the pipeline, passing objects over the pipeline. So you can always go get data center, for example, and get VM host. So let's say basement, which is my primary lab machine here. So you can always explore the relationship between these container objects and the objects which are contained within them by taking advantage of the pipeline in PowerShell. Great feature. So what else can we do with data centers? Clear the screen again. You can also do get command star data center. There's my get, move, new, remove, and set. So let's say get data center branch. So there's both of my branch office data centers. If I were to look at the properties on these, you'll see there's not a whole lot here. Basically just the name. And you can also find the parent folder, which that can actually be useful. If I want to create a new one, I have to start off by knowing the location. So if I want to, let's see, for example, create a new data center, I have name and new data center. If I hit enter, it's going to say, I need to know the mandatory parameter location. Now this is actually a little bit of a trick question here. Let me check in the help of this one, in the examples. Yeah, we do have here's the answer to the question. How do you determine, let me go back to my vCenter client, if I want to put a data center in the root, how do I get a reference to that root? How do I know what the root is? The answer to that question is this. You have to have get folder dash no recursion. So let me show you get folder. Go ahead and talk about folders so you can understand this. We've got here the list of the folders, and if we go over to my vCenter, you'll see that I have several folders, such as this one here, new folder. If I go to VMs and templates, see that I have a couple of others, folder 2, test folder, and that's about it. Now, if we go look, see at the results in my shell, I've got quite a few more. I have data centers, I have VM, I have host, data store, and none of these are obvious from looking at the vCenter client. They're special folders, they do have meaning, and there are things in them, but for the purposes of what I'm trying to do, and that is create a new data center, none of these really help. Although, if I say no recursion, what I'm going to get is data centers, which is a special folder, which is the top level. And this is not one that you see in vSphere, but this is how you tell it where you want to create a new data center. So if I say f equals get folder no recursion, then I can go ahead and do my new data center command, like so, and then location is $F. And that's basically all there is to it with data centers. Folders work very similarly. Now, say that I wanted to create a blue folder versus a yellow folder. You have to think about where they belong in vSphere and how they work in order to, for example, make sure that you're creating them in the right place. Otherwise, you'll create a folder and look for it over here, and it won't be on VMs and templates, it'll be in hosts and clusters. So think about where a folder can go. So in this case, if I were to right-click on Data Center, I have an option to create a new folder. However, if I go over to VMs and templates, I can do the same thing here and here. So it's keeping track of what objects can go where, the vSphere client is. But you have to know how to do the same thing here. So let's say, for example, that I wanted to create a folder in the root of my data center. So I could use the same folder, data centers, and then use that to create a new folder. And note that I use the PowerShell pipeline in this case, and I should see in vSphere client, create folder, and there's my new folder at the top level. If I go back to hosts and clusters, I'll see it there as well. Now, if I wanted to create one underneath a data center, I could do that. Get data center. For example, let's say new data center, and then pipe that straight to new folder. Hit enter, and there it is. And you can see my new folder is right here, right there. Okay. So that's basically all there is to it with creating data centers and folders. They're pretty simple, but what I can do additionally, let's say that I wanted to create a new folder, and now I've assigned it to an object in PowerShell. If I want to get rid of a folder, that's easy to do as well. I just pipe that to remove. And bam, the folder is gone. Obviously, you're going to want to be careful with what you're doing with removing folders. For example, I wouldn't want to remove this folder right here. That would be bad. As you can see here, it will also remove all of its children inventory items. So that would cause some consternation in a production environment. So definitely be careful with that one. Let's get back to our slides. Now I'm going to talk to you about working with custom attributes. Custom attributes in vCenter, as you can see in this screenshot here, you have the ability to create an arbitrary field in the vCenter database and then tie that field to entities or objects in vCenter. By entity, I'm talking about the sort of the high-level objects such as a virtual machine, a host server, a cluster. And you can have these fields, they can mean anything that you want. You'll often see third-party applications would take advantage of these. For example, we've got a backup status. There are backup applications which could use a backup status field that would indicate whether a virtual machine has been backed up or not. In this case, I created a field called service level, and I assigned these different values to the virtual machines. So, for example, in your environment, you might have a rather formal support structure set up for your virtual machines, where if a machine had a high service level, such as gold, then it would be treated differently. Perhaps a support case would have a higher priority than for the service level of silver or bronze. So this is just an example of how I've created something that's arbitrary, that doesn't have anything to do with vCenter itself, but it has to do rather with a business process, and I'm able to tie that data in to my virtual center objects. So it's some really cool stuff, and there's some commandlets, of course, for working with them, which I'll show to you right now. We have two different sets of commandlets. Custom attribute is the first one that we're going to talk about. A custom attribute is an arbitrary vCenter database field which can be attached to any entity type. There are a set of commandlets related to these custom attributes, such as get custom attribute, new custom attribute, set custom attribute, and remove. So when you want to, for example, create a new custom attribute called service level, you're going to be using new custom attribute. You can use set to rename that custom attribute. Say that you wanted to change it from service level to support level or priority. You could do that as well. Now, this only creates the field. It doesn't actually create a value and attach that value to an individual object, such as a virtual machine. To do that, you're going to be using the annotation commandlets. The annotation is the actual value of that custom attribute tied to a certain object. Some of the commandlets we have to work with those are get annotation. That's going to allow you to read that value from the database, and set annotation will let you assign that value to an individual entity. So let's go to the shell and I will show you how these work. We will start right off with custom attributes. So if I type get custom attribute by itself, you'll see here that I've got a table with a couple of properties here, such as name and target type. And here are, these correspond to in the vSphere client. Let me click over here. If you are looking at a view that has virtual machines in it, such as if I click on my cluster and then virtual machines, if you scroll over to the right, that's usually where you'll see by default the custom attributes. They'll usually come after all the other fields, although you can move them back and forth just by dragging and dropping. And you can select to turn them on or off. So here are the custom fields that I've got configured right now, backup status and service level, as you see here. So that's about all there is to the get custom attribute commandlet. If you wanted to use these, you could use the set custom attribute commandlet to rename one, or new custom attribute to create one. So let's create a new one. So the new custom attribute commandlet has two parameters here, name and target type. So let's create a new one and see what the target type is all about. And target type, we'll just put something in there, and it's going to tell me here are the different entities to which I can assign a custom attribute, such as virtual machine, resource pool, folder, host server or VM host, cluster, and data center. So let's say that I wanted to, let's do them by resource pool. So now I'm going to create a new custom attribute called priority, and then also have a resource pool is the target type. So not a whole lot to that. Let's do get custom attribute again. And you can see it shows up there. Now, if you wanted to get just one of these and then using Power CLI to rename one of the custom attributes, there is a little bug in the current version that I'm working with that I'll show you. There's a very quick workaround as well. If I know, for example, the name of it, and if I just type in get custom attribute priority and hit enter, it's going to give me error message. It returns the correct object, but I see this error message as well. There's some bug with the string handling there. If I type an asterisk after it, it actually works as you would expect without an error message. So let's just pipe that to set custom attribute name, and let's say that I want to change it to segment. Could do that easily. And if I go to vSphere client, and now remember this was talking about resource pools, not virtual machines. So I'm going to have to go to a different view to see the exactly how that shows up. So in my cluster, if I go to the resource allocation and scroll over to the right, you can see there's my segment field right there. So lots of cool things you can do with this, but this doesn't actually involve setting the values on these. So let's see what I did with the service level field in my virtual environment right now. Let's see, we'll get VM app star and then pipe that to get annotation. And you can see here that I do have, in a couple of cases, the values assigned to these. So if I wanted to, let's see, custom attribute service level, then it's only going to show those. In most cases, what I would say next is, let's take this object, this annotation object, and pass it to the set commandlet, the setters such as set annotation. There is a commandlet called set annotation. Let's take a look at it. I'm not actually that angry. I just had all caps on. So annotation, set annotation has the entity parameter, custom attribute, and value. So you're going to use the value parameter to change the value of an existing annotation. And you specify which annotation by, well, there's no annotation parameter. This is kind of a little bit of a gap. So you're not going to be able to pass this annotation object here to the set annotation commandlet. So we do this a different way. No big deal, just a little bit different behavior. So I'm going to go back up to this, and instead of grabbing the annotation this way, I'm going to just do get VM app and then do set annotation. I have to give it the name of the custom attribute, which is service level, and say that if I wanted to make all of these to, we'll do value platinum, we do that like so. Hit enter, and you can see that it has made that change. So if I go get VM app star, pipe that to get annotation, hit enter, and you can see those are now platinum where they were gold and bronze before. So let's go back to the slides. Now we're going to talk about how to manage vCenter access control. By access control, I mean, how do you control who has access to what in the system? And this is done using a series of commandlets, of course. Let me show you what it looks like in the vSphere client. You're probably familiar with how most every object, every view in Power CLI has a permissions tab. Under permissions, you have different things that you can edit and modify, and I'm going to be explaining what these are in just a moment. Right here we have what are called permissions. And let me go back to home, and then we have roles here. Roles are, well, let me go back to the slides and I'll show you, but this is the two different places that we're going to be making changes that you'll then see reflected in the vSphere client. So first I'll give you an overview of the different parts to access control. First up is privilege. This describes the available actions that you can modify within your vCenter environment. For example, you can power on a virtual machine, reset a virtual machine, power it off. You can modify a cluster, you can create a new cluster, add a virtual machine host to vCenter. All these things are very granularly defined, and each of them is called a privilege. Then you have roles. A role is a set of privileges. It's a bucket of them, if you will, and there are several that are included with vCenter by default. They're sort of samples. One example of that, it would be a virtual machine, which you can see here in this screenshot here. So a virtual machine user would basically be described as the set of privileges that someone who uses virtual machines frequently would need to have. And obviously you have some others here, no access, read-only, administrator. So each of those is a role. And lastly, you have permissions. The permission is that mapping of a role to a security principal. And that security principal could be either a user or a group. And this user or group could be different backing. When you're connected directly to an ESX server, you have a Unix user account, which is your backing. That's the options available to create that mapping to the permission. However, when you're using vCenter, you instead have your Windows Active Directory user database, and you have the groups in there, you have users in there, and those can be tied to the roles that we've spoken of. Of course, there are multiple sets of commandlets to manage this. We have several pieces, so it's no surprise that there are multiple types of commandlets. I'm going to now talk about privilege, VI privilege, and VI role commandlets. There's only one commandlet for dealing with privileges, and it's called get VI privilege. If you type it, you'll get a list of the privileges. That's all there is to it. For roles, we have get VI role, new VI role, set VI role, and remove VI role. And these will let you retrieve, create, modify, and remove the roles respectively. VI permission, we have get VI permission, new VI permission. Now, note the description here, create a new VI permission. This is a commandlet that you use that actually grants new permissions. The rest of these commandlets that I've been speaking of just this past couple slides, they're a little bit dry, a little bit abstract, but new VI permission and it's a corresponding set VI permission, these are the ones that actually do the work. They're the last stop here on the train when you're talking about access control. And then remove is what you would actually use to revoke a permission. Let's go to the shell, and I will show you how you can, for example, grant some permissions using PowerCLI. In order to grant permissions, we first have to start with a privilege. So let's type get VI privilege, hit enter. A lot of stuff scrolls past on the screen. So let's have a look at some of the options on this. There's actually quite a few parameters here. And I have a couple of booleans here at the top, privilege group and privilege item. Let me show you the results of one of those. Privilege group. So if I do that and hit enter, now I have the top level items, the top level groups of types of privileges available on the system. So for example, let's say that I wanted to examine which of the, let's say provisioning. I want to look at the ones, the specific granular privileges related to provisioning. I could do that using this commandlet. And there's a group parameter, and then I just give it the name provisioning and hit enter. And now you can see these are the things, these are the types of privileges that I can assign to users and groups, and these are the ones that are related specifically to provisioning. And there's a bunch of different things here. With performance, permissions, extensions, VApp, scheduled tasks. So a lot of different options. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create an object in PowerShell containing a couple of privileges, and then we will assign those privileges to a user account, so which will be called a permission. So let's do this by saying, let's see, I'm going to take just a couple of these here, get VI privilege, name, mark as template, and I'm going to do a comma and then just follow it with another one, allow disk access. Okay, hit enter, and you can see that I've got two privilege objects. So if I do $PR equals, that's going to be the privilege that I'm going to be assigning here in just a moment. Next thing I want to show you is the roles. So we have get vi role. Let me show you in vSphere Client what this corresponds to. We were here a moment ago. Here we go, roles. So as you can see here, I've got several starting with no access, read-only, administrator, and on down to role 2, which is one that I created. So you can see that very same list here. And let's see if there's anything more interesting if I pipe this to format list. There's a little bit here, but I don't really see anything interesting. All I see is basically the name, and then looks like there actually is a list showing you the different privileges related. So let's see if I do get vi role name role 2, and if I wanted to select just the privilege list object and go through it, there's a parameter here on select object called expand property, and I can say grab privilege list. Let's check it out in more detail. So this would be the list of privileges that the role called role 2 has. So let's go further. We want to create a new permission. So end to end, we're talking about taking a privilege, multiple privileges usually, taking multiple privileges and bundling those up into a role, and then granting that role to a person or a group. So now we have a couple of privileges in my $PR object. Let's go ahead and create a role. So let's have a look at the new vi role commandlet, and it only has 2 important parameters, name and privilege. So we'll do new vi role name role 3, and then privilege $PR. Hit enter. Okay, so there's my new role called role 3. Let's have a look at the permissions now, and we'll go through the vi permissions. There we go. So if I type get vi permission by itself, hit enter, you can see here that I have, starting at the top of my one of my data centers, I've assigned role 2 to administrator, and then a couple of different folders here. I've assigned the admin role to administrators and the virtual machine power user role to vi guys, which is a Windows group name. So what I can do now is create a new permission, and we will use that to assign role 3 to, administrator. So let's go ahead and check out the new vi permission. This commandlet new vi permission is used to create new permissions on the specified inventory objects. So we need to have an idea of what it is that we're going to be assigning. So let's go back to the vSphere client, and I'm just going to pick at random. We'll say this new data center, and then it has a permissions tab like most every object in the vSphere client. So this add permission, this is equivalent to the new vi permission commandlet. You can see the options here where you would select, for example, a user group, user ID, and then a role. So if I were to hit OK right here, that's what I'm trying to achieve. I'm going to go to the new data center, add administrator, apply this role, propagate here is checked, and hit OK. That's the operation that we're going to recreate. So let's go back to our shell. So you can see there that there's a propagate Boolean option there. We have role, we have principal, which is going to be your user account or group, and then entity. So going back to entity, let's do get data center. I've got one called new data center, so we'll do new data center. We'll just call that DC. So I have my VI role called role 3. I have my data center in the DC variable right there. What else do I need? So let's look at VI permission. It wants to know entity, that's my data center. Principal, that's the username. Role, I've got one called role 3, and then propagate yes or no. So I think we know exactly what we need to know. So let's start off with entity. We'll do $DC, that's my data center, and then principal. just type in administrator in this case, role 3, spell it correctly, and then propagate $sign true. Now, let's go back over to my new data center permissions. You can see that I've got 3 items here. If I hit enter, I should magically, of course I wasn't paying attention to what I did, I had actually assigned administrator to a different role previously. It was role 2. So now it's set to role 3, as you can see here. So that's how you grant permissions using PowerCLI. And in fact, that was the last part of the lesson. So we've talked about an overview of the vCenter commandlets, everything from talking about permissions and containers. We had custom attributes. That was an interesting discussion about working with my synthetic service level custom attribute. Showed you how you could assign those to your own entities, such as virtual machines and host machines and that sort of thing. And then lastly, about access control, users, groups, roles, permissions. Don't forget, very complex. Actually, thinking back on the demonstration about access control, that's probably at the upper limit of what I would do sitting at a shell. When working with something with that many moving pieces, you're probably going to want to take the steps that I've taught you and using these all of these different commandlets and bundle those into a script that would probably produce the best end result. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this lesson.